Getting the job done right is the goal of every home builder and homeowner. As a member of our building community, All Access will become a trusted resource for every stage of your building and renovation projects. Plus, we're constantly adding new project guides, videos, articles, expert tips, and more for members only, because there's always more work to be done. Sign up now or give a gift to another builder at finehomebuilding.com/allaccess.
You don't see you're flying fast and you don't see the mountain that's ahead of you. You don't have the capital to keep going and it catches up, and you just don't have the resources to stay in business.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk Podcast, a regular discussion with building industry professionals. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by builder and remodeler Mason Lord of HVP in Kent, Connecticut. You can find the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk Podcast and the original Fine Homebuilding Podcast at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. You can leave feedback and ask questions there too. Mason, it is really nice to have you on the show. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me, Patrick.
It was, Jeff who reminded me that although you've been part of the Fine Homebuilding community and the Fine Homebuilding podcast for a long time, with your perspective on, our show and your interview, especially of Gary Katz, that you had not been on Pro Talk, and it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed your interview with Gary, and I want to talk a little bit more about that later. But first, can you please tell me about your business? What is your sweet spot as projects? What kind of things do you do? What do you try and stay away from? Whatever you want to tell me.
Well, Hudson Valley Preservation, which is what HVP stands for, this is our 2021 is our 30th year in business. And we started out as just doing a lot of preservation work. We've since moved into being a design build company, and we do a lot of work on older homes, but recently we've started working with Bensonwood in New Hampshire, doing we're a building partner with them on some of their builds locally. The company I have a business partner, Dave Seegers, and right now we are 7 people. Officially, we just hired 2 carpenters, and one of them's first day was today.
Wow, you're attracting talent. Good for you. I've heard from nearly everybody that it is so difficult to hire people. Has that been your experience also?
It has. We really had to get some help with that. We're using Indeed as a source, and that proved to be a very good. And we had a consultant helping us with doing some of the preliminary interviews. So we didn't spend a lot of time on people that really weren't qualified.
Can you tell me, how many applicants did you end up with ultimately to pick from? Or was it a long process? Was it quick?
It went relatively quickly once we got the ad out. I want to say maybe 20, but probably not. It was probably more like 10 to 15.
I'm sure folks are gonna wonder, what is it like doing the Indeed process? What do they offer? What is their special sauce that they're doing for you?
Well, the only thing I haven't really been involved in that. The only thing I can say is that it's something that people that are looking for a job are going to. We tried with Craigslist, and we did get some applicants, but they weren't really that qualified. So I think Indeed is maybe more where professionals are really going, more so.
Wow. On the subject, how did you become a carpenter? Were you exposed to building as a young person?
I was. My father died when I was in first grade, and I had a very kind neighbor, Mr. McNair, who had a workshop in his basement. So when I was maybe 8, 9 years old, I made little pieces of furniture in Mr. McNair's basement. And I think that's where I caught the bug. I also was very lucky in that I went to a school that had an industrial arts program, and the two men that ran that shop were both World War II veterans, Mr. Brune and Mr. Hilliard. And I built furniture, I built a boat. They taught me about how to do a production line. Um, they were great, great men and mentors. And, they were tough. It wasn't like you went into the shop and you fooled around. There was none of that. Like, they were very kind and gentle men, but when they got pissed off, you knew it. Like, faces were red and screaming and yelling happened because it was safety.
Sure.
You couldn't
The
mess
stakes
around.
are high.
Yeah. So I did construction in the summers in high school. And after I graduated from college, well, high school and college, I worked in summers. But after I graduated from college, my high school football coach had started a remodeling business. So I joined his firm for a couple of years. That was Alex Sotier Home Management. And so this was in 1981 when there was a big downturn in the economy. That was after the oil crisis. And when he put an ad in the paper, he got hundreds of applicants. I grew up in Baltimore, and the steel mills were shutting down, and there was no jobs for people. So, I mean, he literally hundreds of applicants. And Victor Shimkus was the carpenter who he hired, and Victor, also a World War II veteran, was a great teacher. And I learned an awful lot from Victor.
How did Victor learn his craft? Do you know?
He, after the war, he became a lather. That's how he started.
We should tell folks that used to be a sub-trade where folks would put up little strips of wood that then you would apply plaster to.
Yes. And I don't know whether, I mean, this would have been, 46, 47. I don't know whether that would have been wire lath too.
Or gypsum. It could have been many things, right?
Yeah. So that's how he started. And from then on, he just was a carpenter. And, back then we were using hand saws and block planes, nailing with a hammer. We didn't have air guns.
Do you miss any of that stuff?
I miss the fact that when I watch younger people using a hammer, they haven't really learned how to use it properly.
Yeah.
Not all of them, but a lot of them haven't.
You use it a lot less, right?
Yeah.
You used to use it a lot.
Yeah, Victor would give the young carpenters such a hard time on the job if they choked up on the handle. That was
It doesn't work, right?
Yeah, right. It doesn't work, and it's like, why do you have such a big hammer if you have to choke up on it? So anyway, I'm happy that we have air guns now. We just bought a Milwaukee battery operated one, which is great.
I heard from another carpenter today that they rarely use their air nailers anymore. It's all battery stuff because it's so darn convenient.
Yeah, it is. And but the point is that we had hand saws, 8-point hand saws, 10-point hand saws. You would cut trim with a miter box that was, the same miter box that people were using back in the 19th century.
It does a good job, though. I think if you'll admit, if you've got a good sharp saw and a good miter box, it does a great job, and you can cut big stuff.
Yes. So anyway, I forgot where I was going with that, but
well, we were talking about how you became a carpenter, and you were telling me about the mentors you had as a young man, and then I distracted you by asking about how Victor had learned his craft.
Yeah. So he was really special person who taught me an awful lot and gave me a lot of confidence. And
then what made you want to start your own business? How long did you work for other folks before it was time to go out on your own?
Well, after I moved out of Baltimore in the fall of 1983, and I went to Lyndhurst in Tarrytown, New York. They had it was part of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and they had a restoration apprentice program. And we would work on the National Trust properties, which basically was just Lyndhurst. And we were low paid, we were making minimum wage. The director there was Joe Cellino, and he was also a great mentor, a craftsman. So I had a really good upbringing in the trade, in the craft. And after I left there in 1984, I pretty much went out on my own. It, you know, I had a lot of confidence and probably a little bit too much arrogance, and decided that I could do this on my own, and really didn't incorporate a business until 1991. So there were a number of years of being a hourly wage, time and materials, working one job to the next.
I assume taking whatever you could get, right?
Yep, pretty much. Pretty much. A woman mentor back then was Eleanor Fitchen, who was ran the Southeast Landmarks Preservation Society, and they had a 18th century church and an 1850s Greek revival in Brewster, New York. And she heard about me and my partner at the time, Craig Marchessault, and that we had been at Lyndhurst. And so she contacted us for a job on the restoration of the old Southeast church. It was a timber frame repair, and here it was, somebody having great confidence in us. And I was young. I mean, let's see, in '86 I was 28. And people like that just make such a difference in a career.
And I bet that was really satisfying work too. I mean, that must have been really fun to do.
It was, and we also knew who had built the building, and we had Eleanor had a great relationship with an architect from Albany, John Mesick. And John had, I think he's retired now, but he had a firm, Mesick Cohen Waite, and they did a lot of public structures throughout the country. They did Monticello, courthouses all around the country. And I think John just would come down and advise Eleanor. So he advised us over the years when we did work for that organization. And
was he generous with his knowledge?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And he was the only architect I ever crawled into a crawl space with. and John he had mechanics overalls and rubbers for his shoes,
Yeah.
things you stretch onto your boots.
Yeah.
And he'd put that on, and he'd crawl underneath a cobweb-filled, dirty, mouse-ridden crawl space and point out things and explain, answer questions that we had. And, again, another great man to have.
That's so awesome. You know that he loved his work, right? That was somebody who loved what they did and, weren't scared to get dirty, which is worthy of respect. You and other listeners might not know, but Jeff and I started this show at the beginning of COVID as a way to help contractors and tradespeople navigate what we assumed would be a serious construction downturn. And I think you'd agree, the opposite happened and residential construction exploded. How has the pandemic affected your business?
It has helped our business. We're in a second home New York market, and we've had a few clients who had jobs in the city, which they still have, but they've sold their apartments and have moved to the area full time. We've gotten a lot more calls for work, a lot of which we've had to decline.
Yeah.
We've had some great clients, smart, generous, knowledgeable.
Is it a challenge to work on their houses while they're there? I bet it is.
Well, actually, the projects that we've done, they haven't been there. I mean,
That's good.
yeah. So, I mean, I mentioned that people have sold. We haven't worked for those clients yet. We were working
Yeah.
for other ones that were not in their homes. And that's one thing that's great about working in a second home market is very often we're not dealing with the client living in their home.
And the pets and all the other complications that go along with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about supply chain stuff? Have you been able to get the material you need?
For the most part, the appliances are generally have been difficult. We have been ordering materials long lead times, just anticipating. So there's a lot of forethought that has to go into it. Windows, of course, if they're coming from Europe, are becoming more and more difficult. I've heard, though, that even North American window companies have,
Long lead times.
lead times. So there's been small PVC piping problems.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I haven't heard that.
Yep. I've also heard that the diesel additive that diesel engines need to have or else they shut down has become difficult to get. I mean,
Do you have diesels?
No, I don't, but
That's good. I don't either.
some of our sub-trades do, and they, now they're buying like 5 gallons worth of that material, so they're prepared. And you just don't know what's going to be next.
Yeah, I know.
Like,
That's what's so weird about it.
Turkeys are a problem now, and it's like, why turkeys? So anyway,
Did you have calls from like folks who were suddenly needing an office or a bedroom carved out of their basement or other living space? Did you get those kind of calls like I heard some folks were?
I don't think so. No.
We've talked a little bit in the past about what we think makes a durable, energy efficient, modern home. Can you please tell our listeners what you think makes a good new house? And then we'll talk about your own house.
Well, I'm a proponent of the pretty good house. And to me, that really fits in well with both new construction as well as remodeling. You can't get it perfect. You want to do the best you can in all areas. If possible, getting rid of fossil fuels. A lot of old houses, that's just not possible unless you do a really incredible air sealing and energy efficiency.
And most folks don't have the budget, I think you'd agree, to do a deep energy retrofit. And I bet you'd say it often doesn't make sense anyway.
Yeah, that's a special client that really wants that for a home that they love, that they plan on keeping for years and years and probably handing down to their family. Indoor air quality. One thing I've learned relatively recently on BS and beer is how detrimental cooking is to indoor air quality. And that's not just if you have a propane cooktop, but all the oils that are being cooked and spread into your air are really unhealthy. And a lot of the, hoods don't really work that well because they're not big enough. In my house, I have a 30-inch, I guess it sticks out 30 inches, and I put a 27-inch deep hood, which was about as deep as I could get. And then I went 3 inches wider than the sides of the stove, because that's really, you want to get as much of that out of your house as possible.
Does your bigger hood work better?
It does.
Yeah, that's good to know.
It does. And, I do have makeup air right behind the stove. It's a damper that opens and shuts when the hood goes on. Because in a high performance home, you need to have the air made up, or else it's just going to be sucking like a vacuum.
Where does it come from if it can't get in?
Yeah,
So we should tell folks you have a Unity house from Bensonwood, right? Am I getting all those words correctly?
correct. Yes. Yep.
And now you're a partner builder with them. Can you tell me about your home, and then first of all, what made you choose that product?
We're members of the Timber Framers Guild and NESE, Northeast Sustainable Energy Association. And I attended back in 2016-17 both of those organizations' conferences. And Ted Benson and Andrew Dye, who is running the Unity side of the company, gave speeches at these conferences. And I learned about the product. I learned about their designs. I really liked one of the designs, which is a very contemporary. It's called the Zoom, Z-U-M.
You like it so much you bought one.
Exactly. And so the thing that I really liked about it was, how am I going to spend time designing a home? I'd have to hire an architect. Probably it would make sense to hire an architect. But I didn't have to do that with Unity. So it's a modular home. I mean, it's panelized, but it can be built modularly. So you can have a bedroom on one side, you can have 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, 4 bedroom. They have different models, screen porch, decks, things like that, mud rooms. So my wife and I were able to determine what kind of, floor plan we wanted to have. And then the design work from there was really, tile and plumbing fixtures and finishes. The house came last August, the day before Tropical Storm Isaias,
Jeez.
which, if you remember, we lost
Flooded New York.
We had trees down everywhere. So day one, they put up some panels. Day two, the storm hit, and trees were down everywhere, and wires they couldn't get to the house. But even so, the house was fully put together, dried in 8 days. So I had one cleaning of the house to, sweep out the leaves and the wetness. But it wasn't like I had to come by on a Sunday and sweep off a deck like you do as a general contractor when it rains on the weekend and you've just started framing. So, and the house had all the insulation in the walls, blown dense packed cellulose. It came with windows and doors installed. One thing that was really nice about that is I didn't have to think about, okay, where in this window opening do I want to put the window? Is it an innie, an outie, or a midi? It's all taped in. It's insulated, foamed. So there was a lot of the work that I didn't have to deal with. And
is it good work? Is it high quality? Did they do a good job?
It's very high quality. Yeah. It's in my opinion, it's exceptional. There's inside and outside air barriers. There's a service channel, which is 2x3. So if you need to make a change down the road, you're not getting into the enclosure.
And we should tell folks too, the service cavity allows the insulation layer to be uninterrupted largely, except for doors and windows, right? It has that advantage too.
Yes, and there are penetrations. You have outlets on the outside, fixtures, hood, energy recovery ventilation systems. So they provide if you have your act together in design, to locate those. So they provide boxes for boxes or conduit that you can run wires through and duct work.
That's cool.
Yeah. So that's, you know, it's, to me, it's top notch.
And so now you're doing this for them, for other clients. How's that going?
Good. Good. We're doing a house in Sharon, Connecticut right now, and on a tough lot,
I
which,
want to talk to you about your lot.
yeah, yeah, a tough
You
lot
have one of the
means
toughest lots I've seen in the area, right? I've seen weirder stuff in Vermont on top of a mountain without a road, but what's it like to build on a dirt road and carve out a lot on a steep site?
If I was going to advise anybody before they did it, I would say make sure your piggy bank is really full.
Double your everything.
Yeah, yeah. It's but this is my pine box house, so I'm going out in the pine box. So it's you know, I wanted it to be somewhere that was peaceful, that had somewhat of a view. We found a piece of property that had a 1930s log cabin on it, and that sold it for me.
You showed it to me. It is quite an impressive structure and really good repair. Someone loved it. You could tell it was taken care of.
Yeah, yeah. So, uh, you know, we put it on the ledge. It's built on ledge. We didn't blast. We didn't, you know, jackhammer. We just set it on top of it, and it's been great. I moved in 2 weeks ago.
What does your excavator say when you told him you wanted to build on this piece of land when you showed it to him?
He was okay with it. Yeah, it was. I don't think he really knew what he was getting into at first.
No one ever does, right?
Yeah,
How is the house to live in? Is it quiet? Is it all the things you wanted?
it is. It is. It's very quiet. It's
Is it
comfortable.
comfortable? I'm sure it is.
Very comfortable. I have solar panels on the garage, and right now, even though solar's not great, I've banked a lot of kilowatt hours. So I think I'm going to be net zero or very close to net zero.
And how are you heating and cooling?
One Mitsubishi heat pump.
Ducted?
Ducted, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
And I have a Sandon hot water heater, which so far is producing very good hot water. And we haven't had freezing temperatures that could possibly, I mean, you know, Patrick, that the water goes through copper pipes out to the unit outside. And everybody
It's a split system. You know, the compressor is outside, more like in an air conditioning system, but this is a domestic hot water unit.
Yes, and hot water goes out, cold and hot water goes in and out. So it's, you know, supposedly it's not going to freeze. I mean,
That gives me the willies, Mason. I'm just going to say it.
I know. Well, I told you, I'll report in after the winter.
Well, I'm glad you did it because I love knowing someone who has one. And it's what's cool about it in addition is it uses CO2 as a refrigerant. Am I correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's neat. That's like, we're going to need more of these things, I bet.
Yeah. We did one for a client of ours too, pretty much at the same time, because that was actually a supply chain problem.
You couldn't get that.
That took months and months to get, both for
Well,
our
it's kind of
client.
a rare thing in this country, I'm sure. And
Yeah.
folks
So
who want it, want it. What would you tell your younger self about a carpentry career or in a building career?
yeah, that's a question that I could go down several roads, but um, I think what I would have maybe told myself back then is to put on my big boy pants a little bit sooner.
As a
And
businessman?
as a businessman, yeah. I was a carpenter, I was a craftsman. I wanted to work for myself, um, and I didn't really like certainly the business end of things. Um, I didn't really like I mean, I couldn't stand sales at that time. Talking to people about their projects and all. I just wanted to go do the work. And I remember telling a colleague who had another business, I think he was talking about picking out light fixtures with a client. And I just thought to myself, thank God I don't have to do that. Oh, I, I don't think it's unusual in this business that there is that, but I think it would have in the catalyst to change happened in the late '80s, early '90s. My partner and I bid on the Putnam County Courthouse was getting restored, and that architect John Mesek's firm was doing it. And John Mesek was a very thorough architect. And part of his process, because he wanted to get craftsmen on the historic preservation end of things, and this building had neoclassical columns, a lot of architectural woodwork, built-in gutters. It had a incredible looking cupola. I don't think it was called a cupola, but and John would go and check out people that had bid with these bigger contractors. So we were a subcontractor for one of these big firms that did municipal projects. And he checked out our work, and one of the companies that we had given our pricing to got the bid, but they cut us out of the work. And we went down to their office in White Plains to talk about the job and all, and they were just looking for any way that they could cut us out. And we got letters from lawyers and this kind of thing, and we were not prepared for it. It was, and one of the things that they pointed out was we didn't really have anything to back our business. It wasn't like we had financials that we could give them that proved that we were a real business. So in some ways, they were absolutely correct to cut us out of the work. But if we'd been with a good company, it would have been a good relationship. But these people were, they had, I know they just had a lower bid that they were perfectly happy to have do the work.
Right.
So
That's a hard lesson.
it was a hard lesson, and we ended up with no work in the early '90s. My son was born in the October of 1989, my first son, and for about 3 months in that winter of '90, I didn't have any work, and I was miserable. It was a really hard time. The other thing I think I would tell my younger self is be careful of being too arrogant. Um, in the late '90s, we had a pretty good run of business, and we were doing work in one particular area. And we had a number of clients. We'd done a number of projects, and we were doing a design for another. This was early in our design build, and we didn't really know what we were doing, but we were putting our feet in that water and going for it. And I remember driving down this ridge road saying, "We own this neighborhood." Well, subsequently, that client that was had we were doing design for took us to arbitration, and I don't think we worked up there again for like 5 years. So this is a very humbling business.
Yeah, and it has its share of ups and downs, as you've alluded to, right? And it seems like it's going so great for a period, and then something changes.
Yes, and as we're in a boom time right now. I think I've been through 5 or 6 downturns, and they can be really rough. And my friend Paul Eldrenkamp likes to say, everybody's a genius in boom times.
Yeah, it's true. What indispensable tool that you now own did you wait too long to purchase?
I don't think that there is any. Um,
You're an early adopter.
yes, I bought the Hitachi compound miter saw back in I think it came out in
Early
like
90s,
85.
right?
No, 80s.
80s, yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe it was late 80s. I had an AEG cordless battery operated drill. That's probably before your time.
So I vaguely remember that company. It's German, as I recall, and
Yeah.
that was the first, like, yeah. The other thing was the Makita in that era, right?
Yeah, I don't remember the Makita, but I remember that, and, of course, it had Phillips head tips. That was all you could get screws, and it was probably the cheapest. I mean, today, it would be the cheapest homeowner's version of a drill, that you could get, but I remember
It was
thinking
amazing, I'm sure.
it was, yeah, and I thought, "You know what? This could be the future of carpentry, using cordless battery-operated tools." Um, and I think, and this is something I would tell younger carpenters, is spend the money on those tools. It's gonna save you time, it's
In
gonna
your
pay for
body.
itself over and over again. Um, I bought a Moffel saw, and Moffel is a German company also, and this little saw it's a table saw, it's a, uh, crosscut saw, it's a miter box all in one, and it's got a great box that you can put everything into neatly. Um, I bought one when it was corded, and a couple of years later, I bought the battery-operated one, and it's just
I
been
I always said that cordless table saws and miter saws made no sense, but I am so wrong about that in hindsight. Like that is just not true. I've used them. They're totally legit tools now, and they can save so much setup time.
yeah, yeah, no question, and this Moffel saw is, I mean, it's a mini crosscut saw. I mean, it's a skill saw, but all of its pieces that you can go with it, you can turn it into all these different versions. So it can be a miter box because it's got a flat thing that you ride it on, and it cuts to the angle.
You have to write that up for Fine Home Building because I know there are going to be tons of people who are going to be wanting to know about that.
I will. It's great, and I will say it's $1,000 saw, but I can take that anywhere. I don't have to drag a table saw. Let's say I'm going to do a small repair or a job that doesn't require more than a day or two. I can manage with this saw. I don't need to load a miter box and a table saw.
That's huge. I mean, just think about
Yeah.
it. Like how few times you need to do that before that is paid for itself.
Yeah.
Anything you've ever bought that under-delivered you were disappointed with?
Yes, recently I bought this was before I had gone on YouTube to see Gary Katz's uh, not hanging pre-hung doors, because you don't hang pre-hung doors. Gary corrected me on. You install them. But I bought
He is the English major after all.
I bought a tool that I saw on Instagram that I thought would help me install these doors, and it turned out that it was not really. Maybe down the road it'll be helpful, but I did see one other tool on Instagram that I've used that is really good, and that's the Viking arm.
What the heck is that?
It's basically it's a jack, but it has maybe its base is maybe a 1/4 inch, and you squeeze the handle and it goes up. So for a lot of different operations, you can use this
Oh, so
to.
you can put it in a space that's as little as a 1/4 of an inch. It's like a bumper jack is arrangement, I'm guessing.
Yeah, exactly. And it, I think it can lift like 300 pounds.
What the heck do you do with that?
I've done lots of things.
Really cool.
Yeah, I mean, it would be great for installing windows. I haven't done that yet, but it helps me put my 450-pound concrete laundry sink in to get it to get it to get it off of the hand truck that it came in with.
I, I'm sold. You convinced me. I really enjoyed your interview with Gary. And, you know, with his many accomplishments, I would think you'd agree. Like, no finished carpenter has risen to a higher level in the craft, right? He's the example of what we all look up to. And it was really surprising to hear about his insecurities related to his chosen career. What were you thinking as Gary was explaining how being a carpenter made him feel bad about himself early in his career? Could you relate? Was that a surprise to you?
Um, well, I think it was a surprise to me because of what you just said about Gary being the quintessential carpenter, but I felt the same way. It, you know, and one thing Gary said is you have to respect yourself so that other people will respect you. And I think a lot of people in the trades, first of all, I don't think a lot of people grew up saying, I want to be a carpenter. I think a lot of people default into the trades. I wanted to go into law enforcement. I wanted to be a Baltimore City cop, but transgressions in college kept that from happening.
Maybe that should have been what you told your younger self.
Yeah, but there's been many times through the years when I have felt not respected by architects or clients who are pushing the limits on things. Back in the 90s, for the most part, it was a design bid build system. Architects would hand out 3 sets of plans to 3 or 5 or however many builders, and the builder is supposed to go off and estimate this job for free. So if you really care about it, you're going to spend a lot of
hours and hours and hours doing this.
And it's a system that's set up to fail. There's generally there's some animosity. You're separated from the client by the architect. The architect's in the middle. And thankfully, that system, at least in my experience, has been moving towards negotiated, collaborative architects, builders, clients working together from the very beginning.
It has to, because like success is in everyone's interest. It's like, I don't understand why it was ever any other way. It's like everyone wants this project to succeed. Why are we fighting amongst each other?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I have a few soapboxes, and that's one that I climb onto on occasion. And it's so I do understand where Gary was coming from, and I think it's important that young people, that any tradesman has enough respect for themselves that comes across to their clients.
I think you'd agree you have to work for the right people too. Both as a general contractor, you have to work for the right clients, and as an employee or as a tradesperson, you have to work for the right contractor. It makes such a difference in your quality of life.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, that's absolutely true. But Gary, he puts it in a very good way.
It was very honest. It was just Gary being Gary, I so enjoyed it. It was a great interview, and it was really really an interesting discussion. He was great too.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it was great to get to know Gary like that.
I learned a lot about Gary I did not know, honestly, and that's, having worked with him for 20 years. Um, what do you see as the biggest challenges to small contractors in the coming months and coming years?
Well, I think finding help, of course, uh, that's going to be a challenge. Managing growth. We would attend Journal of Light Construction shows, still do. But back in the mid '90s, there was a Alan Hanbury, who's a remodeling contractor in the Hartford, Connecticut area. He would say, and this stuck with me, that Alan said, "I know of hundreds of contractors who have gone out of business because of too much work, and a handful who have gone out of business because of too little work." And
What gets you in trouble when you have too much work?
uh, you don't see you're flying fast and you don't see the mountain that's ahead of you. You don't have the capital to keep going and it catches up. And you just don't have the resources to stay in business, bankruptcy. And he told a story about, I think it was a $27 million company that went out of business because
I
of
think
that.
it's just as easy for a $27 million as a $270,000 company to go out of business, right? You just have more things to keep track of.
Yeah. So what I would say is now, ride the wave. It's the best that you can right now, and build a war chest for the future. Um, don't go out and buy an electric pickup truck right now.
What about a boat?
Yeah, probably not. Yeah.
Don't give up your subscription to FHB though.
No, 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 no. That's education. I mean, that's been one of the biggest things for us that's helped us, is being involved in organizations, going to the JLC show, reading Fine Homebuilding, um, joining Nessie, joining the Timber Framers Guild. If you're not educating yourself, you're falling behind.
I met a promising young contractor today. His name was Kevin. And Kevin works in the Newtown area where I live, and he's a Marine veteran, and he has started his own remodeling company and is doing quite well. And he has the same struggles you do, which is finding additional help. And he'd like another truck, but can't afford one right now because they're unobtainable. And what would you tell him? He hears over and over again from contractors that the first few years are a struggle, but it gets easier. I somewhat jokingly said, "Well, that was not true."
I don't think it ever gets easier. It you get better at the business part of it. You know, the actual physical work, the carpentry, has always been the thing that I'm most comfortable with. And of course, there's problems to solve and all of that, but it seems like we can always figure it out.
The
One way
wood's
or
the easy
another.
part.
Yeah, yeah. But the other stuff, I had 3 kids and I was put them to bed, and then I'd go out to the office. I had a separate little barn, and spend
Write estimates for hours.
estimates, try to stay ahead of things.
Do your bookkeeping.
Yeah, I would say hire somebody part-time to take care of a lot of the administrative part, not the estimating, but when you're a one-man show, or you have a couple of employees, and you have insurance things you have to deal with. You might get a call from somebody that needs a certain form from you, and all of this stuff takes time, and it's really draining. So one of the best moves that we made was hiring a part-time person. It was a woman. And a lot of that stuff, you know, yeah, we'll start you like what, 5, 10 hours a week. That quickly turned into 30 to 40 hours a week. It didn't take long. And it really helped to grow the business, answering the phone. Clients, potential clients would call, they'd get somebody on the phone. They can go through, if you have a lead sheet, so a script for talking to potential clients, it's take some of the load off of your back. And if you can afford to hire somebody that can do that, that's what I would suggest.
I'd be curious to know if that kind of person is easier to hire or more difficult to hire than a tradesperson. It was probably a wash.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we haven't gone there yet now, but yeah.
Well, it has
Uh,
been a pleasure talking to you, Mason, as always. Is there anything you'd like to share with our audience before we part company?
I would. Uh, it's been a goal of mine to start some kind of a training program for youth. And I'd like to do something with young people. I think it's important to start to create a spark like I had. I mean, I wasn't aware of it. It just happened. But I loved working with my hands. So we're looking to have an event, which we're going to call something like the Building Olympics, where there are different uh, stations that a young person would go to. So, for instance, there's maybe starting somebody on using a hammer by having big dowels that you have to drive through a piece of wood so they can learn how to use the hammer properly using their wrist, and then graduating up to smaller dowels through a piece of wood and then a nail. So that's one event. Um, Learning how to work with their bodies. So how to set up a ladder, maybe how to climb a ladder, setting a beam on the ground so that they can walk on it, and then maybe raising it up. So we've come up with, a handful of these potential
Events.
a event. So I'd like to have something like this. A goal is to do it in the spring of next year. Um, so any suggestions on that? And I know that this is, I don't know if it's okay to have seventh and eighth graders these days do something like that. Like, is this something that the insurance company is going to say, oh, no, no, you can't do that?
I wouldn't ask.
Right. So this is something that I'd really like to do. And I think it's important that you get to young people that if they're in college, yeah, it's great, but maybe it's too late. Or if they're in their early 20s, maybe it's too late, that the spark hasn't happened. They haven't gotten that thing that gives them a passion for the trade.
Well, so what are you calling this, Mason? So we can have our listeners write into the podcast with suggestions?
Well, what I would say is this was not my term, but Ben from Flywheel suggested Building Olympics.
All right.
I think, what did I call it? Carpentry Field Day. But
we're going to ask listeners for names too, because I don't know, that nothing is jumping out at me so far. Yeah. I'll think about it too.
Yeah, and I think it's got to be fun. It's got to it's got to be fun. It can't be and maybe they come away with something.
Success.
Success, exactly. Yeah, and it's got to be somewhat competitive, because I think for young people that becomes, fun for them. Maybe you pick up a pile of short 2x4s and you have to move it from here to there, so they can learn how to carry a piece of wood on their shoulder. or maybe they have a piece of 1/4-inch Luan plywood that two of them have to carry.
That is that would be a lot of fun. I totally can't wait for this. So sign me up.
Okay, I will. Thank
All
you.
right. Well, that was a pleasure.
Yes.
So what's the website, Mason, for folks who want to check out your company?
It is H is in Harry, V is in Victor, P is in Paul, Corp, CORP.com.
It has been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you, Patrick. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Likewise. Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks to Mason for joining us, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Thanks very much for listening.